In this episode titled The Pursuit of Passion, I open up about a hard truth in this industry. Success isn't just about who you know, it's about who's willing to know you. I've experienced moments where community was spoken of, but in practice, the doors didn't open, whether it was a casual pitch on set or asking for guidance from those higher up. And yet, that's the reality. Human preferences, hierarchies, and disparities exist, no matter the idealistic talk. In my conversation with Andy Ingalls, we cut through these myths, especially the idea that it's who you know guarantees anything. We talk about the real lengths we go to in pursuing our passion, the importance of creating our own work, and why waiting for validation is the longest wait of all. If you've ever questioned what it truly costs to chase your creative calling, this one's for you. Take a listen. Welcome to In the Waiting Room podcast, where we dive into the real lives of working actors. Whether you trained at top schools or came up through self-made hustle, this space is for honest conversations about the grind, side jobs, the craft, and the faith it takes to keep going. I'm Rashad Edwards, your host, and this podcast is about the journey between the big breaks. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at In the Waiting Room Pod, and if you're a working actor, fill out the survey in our bio so we can learn from your journey too. Let's get into it. I have Andy Ingalls here in the waiting room today. I'm happy to share that we are both from the same city and state, all the way from Houston, Texas, the great state of Texas. So, how's it going living in New York versus Texas?
Oh man, every time there's a hill, I get a little bit giddy and excited that there's just contour to the land, you know? Growing up in Houston, it's an incredibly flat place. When I go with my girlfriend's family to Colorado Springs, there's mountains and they just they just fill me with joy, and I get some touch of the same joy just walking up the hills of Washington Heights where I live. It's kind of amazing to have such simple pleasures.
I didn't know you were up in the Heights, man.
I'm up here. Yeah, man.
We need to grab some coffee or something like that. Do you work from home primarily?
Primarily, I do. I work mostly, as you know, as a tutor, work in test prep and college prep, and do a lot of tutoring of various subjects. I think I most prefer to work on essays with students and writing, but I also have a lot of background in math, and so I feel very comfortable and happy getting to get into the geometry and the trigonometry and the calculus and all that stuff. And Zoom is actually kind of perfect for that. And so it's an added bonus. But I work from home doing that, and I narrate audiobooks, and that's been a pretty active thing this past year. You know, it's funny, one of the things that I know you've experienced and we all experience coming from different places, but especially I think from someplace like Texas is just the sort of difference of space and how I very much took it for granted being a kid and just having, even though, you know, 4 kids in the family and I always shared a room, there was still more space
Yeah,
than
yeah, yeah.
than living in New York. And that is always a bit of a shift, especially like going back and visiting family at holidays and then coming home to my apartment, which I love, which is now home and feels more like home all the time, but is still just a shrinking.
hmm It is. How long have you been in New York City?
On January the, let's see, it'll be the January 16th. It'll be 13 years. And so 10 days from now, it'll be 13 years. Yeah. I graduated from the University of Houston on the 12th of January, 2013. I had a one-way plane ticket to New York 4 days later on the 16th.
Why would you do that?
I was a music student at the University of Houston. I was an opera student. And a couple years into that, I knew it wasn't for me. It wasn't really going to be the thing that I wanted to do with my life. And so I started acting professionally around Houston. And I just sort of I had done musicals as a teenager. I was listening to your episode with Michael Gaston, and you at the beginning of that were talking about growing up in the church in Houston
Mhm.
and having your first theatrical experiences at church, and I overlap with you on that. Doing church plays and musicals
Yes.
and singing on the praise and worship team and stuff like that. All sort of my first time, my first taste of performance and audiences and what that felt like. And when I was a teenager, I was doing musicals downtown at Theater Under the Stars in Houston and had some amazing experiences there and then made some connections with people there who later would be people who sort of like that gave me some of my entree into professional acting in and around Houston. So when I was a college student, ostensibly studying music, I was auditioning for and acting in professional plays all over town. And so for a couple of years, I was fortunate enough to do plays back to back to back to back, plays and a few musicals. And I produced some and I acted in a one-man show and like hired a director and planned all the performance spaces for this one-man show and did big giant plays like The Coast of Utopia at Main Street Theater and did a classic British panto at Stages Repertory Theater and went up to Brenham and acted at the Unity Theater in Brenham a couple of times, which was an absolute joy. Um, and I worked with this wonderful actor and director named Kevin Cahoon, who had done a bunch of Broadway musicals, and he had connections in Clear Lake down in South Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were at the Bay Area Houston Ballet and Theater, which was primarily like a sort of school, but they did a big musical every year, and I had some friends down there, and I went down and auditioned, and Kevin, this New York musical theater actor, performer, director, was directing Hairspray, and it was like the last time I had hair, when I was about, 21, 22, because
Yeah.
I was fully bald by 23, but, like,
Wow.
the last gasp of the hair on the top of my head, I played Corny Collins in Hairspray, and Kevin directed it, and then the next year, I played The Cat in the Hat and Seussical, and then the next year after that, I came back because I had just moved to New York, and I came back and I did, Bye Bye Birdie and played Albert Peterson, and Kevin was a really big force for the move to New York. He basically said, I was asking him because I was ready to move on to another place after Houston, after I was done with college. I was ready to try my hand in a different market. I felt like with Houston theater, there's enough to like try a little bit of everything, but I didn't feel like there was a really big world that I wanted to expand into, and I wanted a big challenge. I wanted a big swimming pool. I wanted to like go the where the size was greater.
Yeah.
And there was some arrogance there too. I looked around at a lot of the stuff that was being made there that I didn't think was very good, and I thought, like, I can't sit around and be satisfied with work that's not very good.
Mhm.
I was watching movies, and I was going and visiting friends in New York and seeing plays on Broadway, and I saw Elizabeth Marvel in Other Desert Cities, and I saw Nina Arianda in Venus and Fur, and I saw Felicia Rashad in August Osage County, and I was just like, "Well, those are the performances I wanna give, like, those are the actors I wanna be. Those are
Mhm.
that is the brilliance that I aspire to," and when I would go work and see theater in Houston, I wasn't seeing anything like that. I would see little flashes of it. There was a wonderful actor named Drake Simpson who did this production of American Buffalo at U of H downtown when I was in college there that was just breathtaking, and I was like, "Well, that's, like, 1 in a million," and
Mhm.
nobody was there, and I was just like, "Well, I can't be in this place where" there was a production of a Teresa Rebeck play called The Scene at the Alley Theater, with Elizabeth Bunch and Jeffrey Bean and several other terrific actors, and that it was the first time I saw simulated sex on stage, and I was like, "Well, that's astonishing." Like, not just
Mm.
the sex, but the performances and the rigor of it and the passion. They did a production of Jeffrey Bean again, did a production of Cyrano de Bergerac that I saw 3 times, at the alley, and there were a few performances and a few performers that I was like, "You're the people," but it was
Mm.
so few and far between, and I knew I needed to go where the pool was so much bigger, and I needed to try my hand, and I talked to Kevin Cahoon, this wonderful guy, and he said, "Go to New York. You're young enough that you can put up with all the nonsense."
Ah.
And I've gone back to that over and over again, and I think it was the perfect advice. He said, "You don't have any ties, you don't have any obligations, you don't have, like, you don't have a family that you have to provide for. It's just you at the moment. You gotta try this. You gotta go and try." And he was absolutely right, and I'm really glad I went when I went, because I could have gone when I was, like, more, I don't know, prepared or something, and it wouldn't have been the shock to my system that I needed.
Mm.
So I was 23, and I'm 36 now, and it's been 13 tumultuous years.
What was the nonsense that Kevin was talking about?
I think he was mostly talking about, like, EPAs and,
Oh.
I mean, not just that. I mean, he was talking about the noise and the 8 million people in, a space the size of a shoebox. He was talking about, dealing with landlords and dealing with the train and dealing with all of the cacophony of forces that come between you and trying to make your dreams come true. And I think what he was really getting at was, like, it's never going to be easy. And there's always going to be lots and lots of steps you have to take. But, like, it's a little different now, but I know that one of the first real quandaries that I came up against, that everybody came up against in that time, was you come to New York and you try to go to auditions for, like, big, significant, productions of things, and you don't have an equity card.
Mhm.
And you can't get an equity card unless you do an equity show, and you can't get in to be seen for an equity show unless you have an equity card. And so it's this sort of weird paradox that the only way to fight through is to sit there at an open call all day and hope that enough people don't show up that you get seen. And then you're exhausted and you have to go do whatever job you have. And I think it was a lot of that. It was a lot of those kinds of paradoxes and quandaries and just frustrations that he was talking about when you're young and when you have a ton of energy and a ton of passion for this thing you want. You will put up with those things. You'll fight through them. You'll withstand them. You'll endure them in order to get to the thing you love. And I think he's right. And I think about, like, I still don't have an enormous amount of obligations financially or anything like that, but I do now have a home in New York that I love and cherish, and I really like to be here in my apartment with the woman I love, and we like to sit on the couch and read our books and watch our shows. Whereas when I was 24, I didn't like the apartment I lived in. I didn't have any real relationship with my roommates. I just wanted to be out of the house all the time. And so I would find any reason to go see a reading or a play or a movie, or go, like, hang out on an open call, or go spend my days, or go on tour with something, or go out of town to do a show and make no money. There were a lot Those are the kinds of nonsense too, is, like, it's always some kind of compromise that gets made, and the compromises are just easier when you're younger and you have fewer ties. And so now, even though I'm older and a little bit older, and I don't have very many ties, there are still compromises that have to be made, and some of the compromises I feel already less willing to make, because the things that I have here, this life that I have here now, both financially and personally and emotionally, I really cherish and hold on to. And so I think you're more loose and more free when you're young to just try it.
Mhm. And some don't make it out of that. Some people come in, they go, "This is too much."
Tons.
Have
I
an
would
easier
say
life back
most.
home.
Yeah,
Yeah, most.
most. And that was, like, around the time I came from Houston, a lot of people came. A lot of people were coming from, there's a musical theater program at Sam Houston State University, and I knew a bunch of folks who'd gone there and came up to New York around the same time I did. And I think the vast majority of them have moved back to Texas or have moved to different cities. And it wasn't because they couldn't hack it. I think it's different for every person, but I think for a lot of people, exactly like you said, there were comforts in the life that I had before that I missed too much. Or this is not what I'm giving up to be here is not worth what I'm getting or what I perceive I might get. I don't know. I don't have a clear impression of how I might get from A to B to C. And without a clear impression, it's very hard for me to keep banging my head against this wall.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Have you kept in touch with any of those folks?
I have intermittent conversations with a couple of people. I think I have a sort of set of regrets around that, which is just that I think my attention was so diffuse when I was there. I think, I grew up in I grew up in a very, strict is the wrong word, but insular fundamental religious community, and coming out of that and sort of finding a life, outside of that, uh, very, restricted ideology, um and just, moving into my own life, I think took so much, if not most of my attention, and to the point that I don't think I really connected with a lot of the people I was spending most of my time with in college, in theater in Houston, and I have wonderful, loving friendships now here, and I think sometimes back to the really wonderful, kind, loving, talented people who I met and worked with back then, who I don't really have any connection with anymore, and I think it's largely because I was not available to them at that time. And like I said, there was some arrogance there too that I did believe that my destiny was elsewhere. That like I remember thinking like y'all can have this. I'm moving on to like bigger and better things. And it's like it's nonsense
Mhm.
because everybody's doing the best they can with what they have. And I'm sure I wasn't seeing a lot of what was so good about that time and that community life because I was too focused on, I gotta get on, I gotta get on, I gotta get past, I gotta get through. And so I don't have a lot of connection to that part of my life. And I periodically I'll send some emails, I'll make some calls, I'll send some texts and touch base with some people, but I don't it's sort of something that one of those regrets that shapes the way I want to approach creative and personal relationships I have now because I just wanna be here. I just wanna be here right now with the people who I meet and get to share creative and personal spaces with, knowing especially that I am capable of doing the opposite.
Can you explain how different life is or was for you growing up in Texas and living in New York as an adult? And how much of what was shaped in your life as a youngster has either pushed you into your craft and the work that you do today?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences, and this is something that I try to pay close attention to, is that I think so much of my childhood and teenage life and upbringing, so much of it revolved around judgment. And I think there's any number of reasons that happens and any number of contexts in which that becomes the sort of primary driving force. But I think for me, in my particular environment and my particular sort of upbringing, there was always a sense of these thoughts I'm thinking are bad thoughts. These actions I'm considering taking are bad actions. Um, there is good and holy, there is bad and unholy and damned. And that pure, rigid, absolute dichotomy between that which is above and that which is below, that which is beyond and that which is earthly, that which is good and therefore godly, that which is bad and therefore of the devil. That pure judgment pairing, that split between heaven and hell that informed and undergirded everything and made even the most mundane choices feel absolute and feel eternal and feel like they had endless significance and importance. I think that's some of what I'm talking about when I try to imagine what was happening that I was so occupied with that I couldn't really see the people that I was spending all my time with when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. All these years, and it's a slowly unfogging process because I think the biggest difference is that all of those judgments, all of those, this is of eternal significance and it has to do with sin and it has to do with absolutes and it has to do with eternity. All of that was like really thick mud that was thrown on the window between me and what was really going on or what was actually happening in front of me. I couldn't see the people who I was talking to. I couldn't really make out my sensory experience, like what
Yeah.
I'm seeing and hearing and tasting and touching and feeling. Like I couldn't make it out because there was this gigantic mountain of judgment over all of it. And it all meant something, like, profoundly important, and sometimes it was paralyzing, and sometimes it compelled me to such frantic motion that I couldn't even see what I was doing, and it was rarely in between, and rarely slow and simple enough to just be a conversation between friends, or to just be a performance, or to just be coffee, or to just be a class that I was taking, or frankly, to just be sex, like, or something like that. And so relationships, creativity, professional work, all of these were soaked in this morass of judgment and like even when, not even when, I mean, I would say especially when I was no longer reading the Bible or praying or going to the church building. That was all the sort of like foundation of how my nervous system worked. Like that was the foundation of how I lived in the world and communicated with other people. And it's been a very long, slow process of sort of unprogramming those habitual reactions to things and instead trying every day now to see things as they are, to see that this other person is another person, that my father is a person who is living his life in the best way he knows how. My mother is a person who's living her life in the best way she knows how. I am also trying to live my life in the best way I know how, to do no harm and to try to live clearly and vividly right now and not way in the past and not way in the future and not in heaven and not in hell. And I think that's the biggest difference. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so are you saying you are no longer reading the Bible anymore? You're no longer connected to the religious practice in that way?
I'm not. And I don't know I don't know if that's I don't know if that's forever. I know that it was compulsive for me. I know that it was something that was so, overwhelming, to my other senses and to, like, just the just being alive in the world, and especially then, talk about creatively, overwhelming to my ability to really try to see existing from someone else's point of view in order to play them in a play or in order to write them in a novel or in order to, try to understand something from someone else's point of view. I was total because I don't think it's a matter of taking it too seriously. I think it's just a matter of it was so monolithic as to be the only thing in my consciousness, and only rarely could I see through it or around it or past it to just see that like a flower is a flower. And
How else would you see it?
well, I think, you see it as this is a m- message on my walk today that I am treading the right path in the way of the Lord or something like that.
All
And
right,
it's like,
right.
well, you can pass any judgment or tell any story um, about things that are just happening. The stories that are around the things that are happening are not necessarily the things that are happening. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
No, no, no. I get what you're saying. And part of it's like going down a rabbit hole on a normal day-to-day situation, which I can relate to, but in a separate religious view. And I'm thinking that does this have to do with because it's in comparison to verses, let's say you were never in this field of work, acting, would you still have this viewpoint on your relationship to God in the Bible and how to move on a daily basis? Or is it because it's in comparison to being engulfed in this acting world, the creativity where there's almost this anything goes as far as spirituality, you get to delve into different modalities of spiritual practices and thoughts and ideas.
I don't think so. I mean, no, I appreciate that, but the movement away from sort of religion for me happened prior to deciding that this was what I wanted to do. And so, I mean, this is part of, I think, the way I pursue my creative life, but it's the sort of movement away from like religion and faith happened before this and is connected, I guess, in the way that anything would be connected when it is a very important part of where I come from, but only connected now in that it is something that I'm continuing to sort of untangle as I pursue the rest of my life, which includes acting and includes
Mhm.
the creative life. But I don't know. I think, one of the things, and this is not to necessarily go into it, but like I hear what you're saying about guiding a kind of righteous life. And also, I think, we see all the time that the people who are following Old Testament, New Testament, any of the testaments are not themselves immune from leading people down paths toward destruction. And that's a whole separate thing. But
Yeah.
like it is, I think I can see it being used for good, and I can see it being used for great harm.
Mhm.
And to me, in my experience of it was uh, a sealed box, and I needed to unseal the box because it made for me a very small world. It
Mhm.
made for me a very small world disconnected from other people and in judgment of superiority to inferiority to other people. And that was the way that it lived in my blood. The whole fundamental religious faith, the way it lived in my blood was poisonous to me.
Mm.
And I couldn't have it anymore. I couldn't have it. And I, I needed to, I needed to have my own life.
What particular denomination were you raised in?
Southern Baptist.
Southern Baptist.
And you went to church every Sunday during Bible study on Wednesdays.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
That was my whole youth. Yeah.
Your now girlfriend, was she raised in the similar vein?
No, she was raised in Scotland, and so she went to, oh gosh, was it a Catholic school? It might have been C of E, Church of England or Anglicans or something like that. But
Presbyterian or something.
she grew up in Edinburgh in Scotland, and no real religious background in her family, no.
She's in the same industry?
No, no, she's a lawyer. We love it. She actually I think she just got home from court.
Nice.
Yeah.
What are some of the myths about the business that actors misunderstand? One misconception that we all share, what would it be?
I think here a lot of times people speak very sort of bitterly about the phrase "it's who you know." It's just who you know. It's just who you know.
Yeah.
And I hear that sort of said sometimes with like a frustration or a bitterness or an injustice in the tone. And I don't particularly think that that is unjust. I don't particularly think that it is, I think that it is a true thing that connections and relationships are everything in the business generally. Not everything, but they are a large thing. And I don't necessarily think that that is a negative. I think that the work that we do is, in its most essential nature, always interpersonal and always collaborative. And however it is that you get into it, I mean, for myself, when I came to the city, I was looking for any opportunity to just get around other creative people and be in an environment where I could have an opportunity to do something. And that meant that like I was doing my best to like do my day job work and then go and find a reading to watch or to volunteer with or meeting. I met so many like designers and actors and directors in coffee shops because I struck up conversations about what they were reading or crazy, like weird things like that that I may not do anymore because it's just not where I'm at the moment. But
Mm.
the idea of it's who you know being, there are, think, negatives in there about like that person was born on third base. They have 1,000 connections because of who their parents are,
Yeah.
who their friends were when they were children or whatever, or how much money they have. And like,
Yeah.
sure, there are those things, but the rest of it, I think, is I meet a person and I make a good impression on them because I'm kind, because I am available, because I'm open, because I do my best to connect with them and connect with whatever material we're working on together or to show up. Like just showing up is such an enormous part of all of these relationships. And if somebody says, "Hey, I'm doing a thing. I'd like for you to see it." And then you say, I will come and see it." And then you do that. First of all, people are kind of amazed. I'm amazed when I
Mhm.
invite somebody to come and see something and they say, "I'll come," and then they come. That's terrific. And it's also just a kind of process whereby you learn who somebody is and you learn who you want to spend time in a room with, creatively, personally, emotionally, who you feel safe with. And if you are a person with whom someone else feels creatively available and safe and seen, if you show up and if you are someone who encourages other people to show up, then you will meet the people you will meet, and those connections will maintain and you will maintain them. And then those will be the people with whom you make the things that you're proud of. And then when you make the things that you're proud of with the people that you've met and with the people with whom you've connected, then hopefully other people will see that thing that was made that is bigger than the sum of its parts. And they will say, I want to connect to that too. I want to touch that source. And some of them will be good to connect with and some of them won't be. But if I'm trying always to and improve my sense of like who do I want to be and like who do I want to be creatively? Who do I want to be in my life? How do I want to live and love other people? How do I want to pursue my creativity and support others creative journeys and work? If that's what I'm focused on and I pursue that actively, then I think I can trust that I'm not missing out on some party that's happening without me.
Mm.
I'm sure there's 1,000 parties that are happening without me, and I will go out and I'll find the one that's for me. And I'll go out and find the group that's for me. And I've found a lot of those people totally by chance. And also because when I saw something in someone that I admired or that I respected, I told them so.
Mm.
And I said, I love this thing that you do. I would like to find a way that we can collaborate or do that thing together. And sometimes it doesn't happen right then. Sometimes it happens years later. But just expressing, hey, you did something beautiful, and I love that beautiful thing you did. I'd like to see more of the beautiful things you do. Will you give me your information, or can I give you mine, and will you tell me next time you're doing a thing? And then you show up. And it's a long, slow, sometimes arduous, sometimes surprisingly fast process. But I think that is, to me, all of what it means to know people and what it
Mhm.
means to, like, who it is that you know. I think that if I show up and I work the best way I know how, and I do my best in my life to become more creatively available, and then I offer my time and my attention and my love to those around me, then we will go to the next step and we'll make something together that is profound or funny or beautiful or interesting, or I don't know what it's going to be. But
Mhm.
that's been my experience of these 13 years in 100 different sort of ways of, it's who you know is, like, I think it's only a craven mercenary thing when you're dealing with craven mercenary people. And it's not, if you're not, I don't know, if my life was about trying to, like, if I thought that, like, "Ooh, I have this idea for this play, and all I really need is somebody with $1,000,000." And I went out and all I really wanted was to find somebody with $1,000,000 who would just let me, like, borrow whatever, their $1,000,000, then yeah, who you know would feel like shit. That would feel like a horrible thing to, like, think that things revolved around. But if
Mhm.
instead what I thought was, I think I probably need $1,000,000 to make this happen. I don't know where that's going to come from, but I'm going to do everything I can to find the people who believe in this thing and who I believe connect with it, and will come up with whatever money we can come up with to make it as well as we can until it accumulates to $1,000,000, then that's a very different, like, that's a very different prospect. It's a very different shape to the thing. And so I don't know. I think the people who I know are brilliant, and I'm so proud to know them. And I think if I keep loving them and making things with them, then together we will probably meet more people who are
Mhm.
brilliant and with whom we'll make things that we love and are proud of. And I don't really know at this moment anything that's more important to me than that, or that is more meaningful to me than just, I'd like to spend my time with people I care about and respect, making things that I'm proud of and respect.
Mhm.
Hmm. Well said.
Thank you.
So,
What have you learned about navigating this industry? And you say you've been here about 13 years now. Has the approach changed? And if so, what has made it change? What did you pick up during this time that had you shift things versus what you intended to do when you got here?
It's a great question. I think some of it that I think is embedded in that thing about just trying to make things I'm proud of, because I think when I first came to the city, I think the large sort of container that I had in mind for, like, a career was, I'm gonna audition for a Broadway show, and I'm gonna get on Broadway, and I'm gonna do a big regional show, and I'm gonna,
mhm.
do Shakespeare in the Park, and I'm gonna prove myself, and I'm going to join hands with these large established institutions, and then I'm going to act in a film, and that's going to be the sort of, like, set of goals. And I don't think those things as, like, sort of pantheon items of hope are gone. I don't think they are dead in my mind. I don't think they are in any way, like, they don't seem out of the realm of possibility. They also don't seem like the driving forces of my dreams, because I think the question of, like, what does it mean to be a big star? What does it mean to be the person on the poster? What does it mean to be the center of this operation, this big money operation? I don't think that's where I live. And I think one of the big things that sort of occurred to me is I looked at myself and I looked around and I looked at what I was really enthusiastic about and really liked, and a lot of it was really weird. And a lot of it was really off the beaten path. And I think a lot of the things that I was looking at that were big and giant and splashy and central to the conversation were not terribly interesting to me, and I wasn't terribly interesting to them. And so, I think I tried to show up for a bunch of auditions and big cattle call things for big whatever, whatever. And I got my first big job going on a national tour of Peter and the Starcatcher, which was a joy and which was absolutely thrilling and a show that I loved with every fiber of my being. And then a couple of years later, I got to go out on tour again with Million Dollar Quartet, a very lovely musical that I didn't feel very creatively attached to.
Mhm.
And that was my first equity job. It was how I got my card, and I got to travel around a bunch and play the narrator of that show, and then I sort of came back from that, and I'd been training, I'd been doing classes around the city, and I'd been doing audiobooks, and I'd been, auditioning for other things and doing development of new plays and just trying to meet everybody I could and work with everybody I could and volunteer for everything I could, and, um along the way, met some people from NYU grad acting, and
Mhm.
Scott Illingworth especially, who encouraged me to audition, and met some people from the program who graduated from the program who I admired enormously and just thought they were so free and so available and so brilliantly fearless about failure and about trying things that didn't work and about just jumping in with both feet to whatever was in front of them. And I knew that I didn't have that. I knew I was protective of myself. I knew I was afraid of failure. I knew that I was very regimented and very precise in the way that I approached things. And I needed to explore that kind of training and that kind of freedom and that kind of release. That kind of, as Scott Illingworth put it at the time, relinquishing of control. And so I went and I auditioned and I got in and I did that, and that was during the pandemic, and then we came out of the pandemic and, I auditioned and got my first couple of little TV things, and then the strikes and the strikes and the strikes, and then here we are years later, and things are so different in the sort of landscape professionally of, like, what opportunities are possible and what jobs are out there and who's doing those jobs and how many opportunities are available for anyone and how many people are there who were cutting their teeth in a time of much greater abundance, and now the teeth are cut and we're ready to bite, and there's not a lot to bite on. Um,
Mhm.
and so the big thing that I think has shifted, especially since that first little flush after the wonderful educational experience of grad school, and something that was also informed by grad school, was I gotta make it. I gotta make it myself.
Mm.
I've gotta I've gotta get out there and I've gotta try. I've gotta make my own things. Last year, I very, very fortunate to work with two of my friends, Miles Purinton and Allison Frasca, on their wonderful new play, Czar, about the New York rat czar. Do you know about the New York rat czar, Rashad?
Yes, yes, I do.
Yeah.
Of course.
They wrote this hilarious play, this absolutely brilliant, funny play about the role of the rat czar, and Miles played a ton of characters, including 4 different rat czars, because they all keep dying in suspicious circumstances. And Allison plays the new office manager of the rat czar's office, fighting the war against the rats. And
Mm.
I saw them do a reading of it in the fall of 2024, and I called Miles, who I'd known for years, and I said, "Do y'all have somebody directing this? I know it's like it was the first reading, it was the first public reading that they'd done." And I said, "Do you have anybody directing this?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Is there any way that I could be of assistance. I would like to work with you on this as you keep developing it and working on it." And he said, yes. And so they would come to my apartment and we would chat. And we would work on the play for hours, and we all brought garbage, and we built costumes and set pieces and props out of cardboard boxes and garbage and aluminum foil. Because
Wow.
the realm of the rat is all made of garbage, and it takes over the set as the play goes on. And we spent over the course of months last year, we got together several times. We had 2 readings, one in April, one in November, and it's been so absolutely thrilling to me to just get together with 2 other extraordinary creative minds and hearts and hilarious senses of humor and brilliant performers, and just keep working on this thing and honing it and developing it and moving it hopefully forward and getting it to a place where it's ready to, like, be in front of all the audiences. And the readings were tremendously fun. And after the reading in April, I went to see a play at the Public, and during grad school, I had a wonderful experience getting directed by Erin Arbus, and I've never had an experience like that with a director who I felt was so completely in love with the play and so in touch with all of us and knew exactly how to build the creative space that made it possible for everyone in the room to do their best work and then move past their best work into something they didn't know they were capable of doing. And we did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead with her,
Mm. Mhm.
and I I've never had a better creative collaboration. I love her. She's a genius. And she's, I think, the associate artistic director or interim artistic director of Theater for a New Audience now down in Brooklyn. And she had directed this play that was at the Public in May. And I went and saw it, and she happened to be there. And I talked to her and reconnected, and she asked what I was up to. And I told her about Czar. And I said, I think this is it. I think this is the thing right now, is we've all just really got to make our own stuff. And she said, "Andy, that's not the thing right now. That's always the thing." And I sort of laughed and I was like, "Ah, ha, ha." And I thought about it later, and at first I was like, I was annoyed because I was like, "Well, yeah, easy for you to say. You're like, high up in this institution." And then I thought, "No, I think that's actually what the job is, being an associate artistic director at a big institution too, is you're always having to make it with your hands. Like, you're always having to put out an idea and try to make it as the best you can with as many resources as you have or as few resources as you have. And it's always a matter of, it's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to try and to make something new. And I think that's the big thing, is like, the big difference is, I think when I got here, when I moved here, I thought there are those 10 big towers, and I'm going to climb to the top of the big towers. And there are, I don't know, clear or unclear, easy or difficult steps to climb to get to the top of each of these towers. And all of those towers, I think, are primarily occupied by the people who built them. And
Mhm.
they can invite you and you can go be part of that tower, but it's not yours.
Mhm.
It doesn't belong to me if I get invited to the top of the tower. I get to go there. I get to visit. I get to play, and I get to dance at the top of the tower. And then I move on, and hopefully, eventually, I build my own tower. And then I can invite other people to come play and dance and create with me. And I don't know really, like, I don't know what the bricks and mortar are. I don't know how the floor plan of the tower is going to look, but I know that I gotta make my own. I gotta make my own and put it out and have it seen by strangers and
Mhm.
try.
It's such a risky business that you feel like it's worth the risk.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like it's worth the risk. I feel like it's worth the risk because the alternative is I didn't try.
Mm.
The alternative is, it looks too risky, I'm not gonna try. And it's like, risk of what? Risk that I spent my time doing something I loved and somebody else didn't like it very much? Or I could spend my time doing something I don't love. And is that better somehow? Is it better somehow to not try? And I don't think there's any I think there are sacrifices that a person can make that hurt someone else, and I think those are too far. I think that can be not worth it,
Mhm.
but I think there are sacrifices someone can make that belong to them that, for me, are worth it. I'm not selling my plasma. Like, it's not, something where I just need to get to this open call and I will do whatever it takes to get there, and that means that I'll, lie down in front of a train for money. Like, it's not like that.
Mhm.
The sacrifices I'm making are the time and resources are my own to choose to do with what I will, and what I choose to do with them is try.
Are you in a privileged position in that sense?
I
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there's a lot of different elements of privilege in this. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways I got really lucky. When I was leaving Houston, I was going to college as a music student, and I was part of this program called the Honors College, and there was a program through the Honors College to go do a summer internship with a software company after my freshman year of college, and so I went and did that, and then a couple years later, there was a different department of the same software company that needed somebody to make training videos for them, and they remembered me from the internship, and they called and said, "Do you wanna come, work for us over this summer?" 2 years later, 2 or 3 years later, and I said, "Yeah, sure," and I went and worked for them, and then that turned into, after I graduated from college, a full-time job that became fully remote. So I had a full-time job with a salary that I took with me that was all remote when I moved to New York, and that was an enormous privilege. That was an
Mm.
enormous, like, that gave me an enormous flexibility to do a lot of the things I'm talking about, and find ways to show up, and find ways to volunteer, and find ways to connect with as many people as I could, and try as many things as I could try. And I don't know, I think the principle stands that you gotta show up a lot for as many things as you can find that are creatively enjoyable to you as much as you can, and sometimes that's not as available, and sometimes that is as available. And I think some of that also circumscribed my willingness to leave Houston, but I also think, like, I don't know, again, I think if the time and attention, I think the resources that we have most, that are most essential to what I'm talking about in terms of pursuing a creative life, I think the resources that I have most are time, attention, and effort. It's not like money is required to, like, put food on the table and keep a roof over the head and hold on to, like, some semblance of that, and I think there's a very great range of variety as to, like, how much time and how much effort and how much attention people have to spend in order to have the financial resources to survive in the city and to, just stay afloat. And then, if it's not all of your time and attention and effort, what are you doing with the rest of the time, attention, and effort that you have that is available to you before you need to rest?
I think this part gets left out of the conversation when it comes to doing these creative ventures and pursuing your dreams. I think that it creates a lot of, just at least outside looking in, at people who've tried this path that they become resentful of it. Well, they didn't know it would be this hard. They didn't know it would take this amount of money because they feel like it's part that gets left out of the conversation when it comes to the planning of it.
Absolutely. And I think, like, I think that, going back, I think that's one of the elements of nonsense that I think Kevin was talking about, which is, like, not nonsense. It's like, the nonsense is, you're young and you have to find a way to cobble together the money to survive and pay your rent in a tiny little shoebox. And that is difficult to cobble together for anybody. And, some people, like, I think the resentment is often very comparative of, that person has it easier.
Mhm.
I have it harder. Absolutely. That is an absolute truth, that it is, somebody requires less of their time, attention, and energy in order to make the thing happen. And that is difficult. And if that is the case, okay, what is it then? for you? What is the creative effort that you want to be able to make, and how much does it cost? And like you said, mapping it out, and that clarity of like, okay, what is the amount of money that I need per month in order to survive? What's the minimum amount, and
Mhm.
what is the nature of my quality of life at that minimum amount? And am I okay with that minimum amount?
Mhm.
And that's an important question and a difficult question to answer, but it has to be asked. And I think I have a sense of that for myself, and I've like reevaluated that for many, many years. And I think it's true of everyone who's I think so much of the question really does redound to, is what I want to win an Oscar? Is what
Mhm.
I want to win a Pulitzer Prize? Is what I want to be recognized? Is what I want to be loved? Is what I want to make something I love and am proud of?
Mhm.
And the 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 inputs for each of those are very different, have been very different for every person who has done those things. But I think maybe that's one of the big things that I sort of like has changed in my attention, is in my sort of landscape of it, is that I think what I can control, because I can't control the rent price in New York. I can control where I put my attention. And if my attention is on how close am I to winning an Oscar today, that's a pretty wild and dense thicket
Mhm.
through which to try to see. But if my attention is on how close am I today to aiming myself toward making something that I love and am proud of,
Mhm.
that's something that's a lot more within my control.
Nice. Having said that, do you feel like you've made it?
I believe that on days where my attention is on those on that on what I've just said about, on a day when my attention is turned to how can I best be proud of my own actions, and how can I best make something that I love and I'm happy to see, and how can I best support and love those around me so that they are also satisfied, on the days that that is where my attention is, I have made it.
All right.
Hey, what was that quote you had when you answered the questionnaire? What's one habit or mindset that's helped you the most in this career?
Wait, was it the Marcus Aurelius thing?
Yeah.
I couldn't remember what I put. It's very in line with that. The man of ambition thinks to find his good in the operations of others. The man of pleasure thinks to find his good in his own sensations. But the man of wisdom thinks to find his good in his own actions.
Wow. That's powerful, man. Listen, thank you for sharing that. It's a lovely place to end this conversation with wisdom and with love and kindness and thoughtfulness. Andy, you're very inspiring. I'm happy you're here in New York City and that you're part of this grad acting community at NYU. And you've done so much to even bring this podcast alive with Studio Tish this past summer. So, I really appreciate it.
I'm very glad. I'm very glad. I love you, Rashad, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks.
All right, man. Much love to you too. Well, we'll be talking soon. Keep me posted on this rat czar thing because we have Scurry Pest, uh, a pest control company.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about you. Yeah.
Would love to come to a reading and check it out. So
Yeah.
great. We'll talk soon. Take care.
This is good, bro. Yeah.
That's a wrap for this session in the waiting room. If this resonated with you, share it with another artist on the grind. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at In the Waiting Room Pod for more content and updates. If you're a working actor, head to our bio to fill out our survey. It helps us bring more voices into this community. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and keep showing up. The waiting isn't wasted. See you next time. Peace.